Okay, our next podcast goes into the respiratory system, and the purpose of the respiratory system is the title of your chapter, gas exchange. So, gas exchange is taking in one gas and expelling or releasing another. So, in gas exchange, there's kind of some different levels. And so, in this, the first level of gas are phases. So in this, the first phase of gas exchange is breathing. So we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. So that's one level. But there's a lot that goes on in between that breathing stage. And that is the oxygen transfers or transports um, from the lungs into the circulatory system to the cells for servicing and for cellular respiration. So the transport is phase two. Transport of that oxygen to the cells where cellular respiration occurs, and then also the transport of carbon dioxide, the byproduct of cellular respiration, back to the lungs to breathe out. So phase two is transport, and phase three is the exchange of gases with the body cells. So again, we have that cellular respiration occurring in the mitochondria. We learned all about that back in Bio 1. And but we have to get into the circulatory system, in and out. So there's a strong connection here between the respiratory system and the circulatory system, which is the next system we'll look at. But these are kind of the phases of gas exchange. So as we did in the digestive system, we're going to look at respiratory systems in very simple animals, and then look at more complex and look at some comparisons. We see a lot of variations in respiration in animals, as was the case in digestion. In animals, we see variations in the system and how it exchanges those gases. Some invertebrates, like this example here of the earthworm, can actually exchange the gas through their skin. All right, so they take in oxygen through their skin and they expel carbon dioxide through their skin. So sometimes biologists call these skin breathers because they can do that. Now, we'll learn that all the surfaces of respiration have to remain moist for this transfer. So kind of like lubrication, it has to remain moist for the oxygen and carbon dioxide to transfer. So that means their skin has to remain moist. And so we see that, say, like in frogs and things like that. Now, frogs um, can carry out this type of gas exchange, but they also have lungs, so they have two means of respiring. But the name for this type of gas exchange through the skin is called integumentary exchange. So integumentary is referring to the skin, like the integumentary system. Um, all right, so that's how they can exchange through the skin. But uh, most animals have some type of surface inside the body or that projects out from the body that is going to be the surface for respiration. So these are more specialized respiratory surfaces. So here we see some examples of those, like fish. We'll get to fish in a minute, but they exchange through their gills. So that's their respiratory surfaces. And other aquatic animals have gills that they can respire. Now they have to pull the oxygen out of the water, so they have to break it from the water molecules, and we'll look at how they accomplish that in a bit. Um, Insects, a lot of insects have tracheas, so just like the same term that we use for our windpipe, tracheas, they have these tubes that run into the body, and but they don't culminate in a lung. They just run into the body, and they have uh, basically ending passageways in the body where oxygen and carbon dioxide are transferred through. And the openings are not in their mouth, but along their abdomen. So their oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange takes place through little openings along their abdomen. We'll look at that in a minute, but those are called spiracles. And then we have more complex type of system that is has structures inside specifically to protect and to um, package the respiratory exchange in lungs, and we see that in mammals and other animals. Okay, so we'll look at some of these, but those are some of the respiratory surfaces, and we'll look at some different examples as we look through. Let's look at this one first. Sorry. Okay, so insects. We mentioned that they have these tracheas and they transport these directly into the body cells. So here we see, this shows a microscopic view of some tracheas here, and here we see the opening that comes in, and these airways just go straight to the body cells. And again, the openings are called spiracles, and they run down the side of the animal, as you see there. All right, so that's a tracheal system that we see in insects. And then in fish and other aquatic animals, they have gills. Now, gills, as I mentioned, are surfaces that are meant to extract oxygen out of water. That's a little harder to accomplish, so they have a mechanism by which they do that, and that mechanism is called counter current flow. It's either called counter current flow or opposite current flow, and in this path, this is in this process, the water goes across the gills. So in this fish here, the water's going across the gills and it moves in one direction. So this right here shows one specific gill arch here, and so the water's going across in one direction. So we pull out one of these filaments here, and that shows one filament, and the water's moving in one direction. This arrow is depicting the water flow going across the filament. And there's little openings in here in between these lamella, and the water's going through there. Now, the lamella have the blood vessels. So blood, as we'll look here, and we'll see, especially in our next chapter on the circulatory system, blood is depicted in all of our diagrams as either being oxygenated or non-oxygenated. So if it's red, the vessels are colored in red. That is representing blood in there that has oxygen. If it's blue, it's representing blood that does not have oxygen. So in the lamella, you see you have a vessel that's bringing in blood that does not have oxygen, path of the blood right there, and then it goes across the lamellae in one direction. That's what this arrow right here is showing, the direction of the blood flow in the lamellae. It's moving in this direction, and as it moves across the lamellae, it picks oxygen up. And again, it has to pull it out of the water, separate it from the water molecule. And the way it does it is the friction that occurs between the different directions that are occurring. This direction of the blood flow is this way, the direction of the water flow is that way, and that opposite current flow causes a friction that allows for the extraction of that oxygen. That's called opposite direction flow or counter current flow or exchange, but that's what allows them to get that oxygen out of the water. So here we see the human system. Now in our outline, what we do is we look at the major structures of the respiratory system, the nasal cavity, the trachea is the common name is the windpipe. The trachea takes the air down to where it branches into two passageways. The trachea branches into the bronchus that branches into each lung. The bronchus then goes into the lung, and then it branches into smaller airways called bronchioles those dead end in the lung in these little pouches. Those pouches are called alveoli. Here's a pouch. The alveoli are air spaces that are surrounded on the outside by blood vessels. And the blood vessels are coming to get oxygen. So you see the path here is the blue, non-oxygenated. It covers the alveoli, and purple is representing blood that is being oxygenated. So the oxygen is leaving the air spaces, getting into the bloodstream, and then it's going to where it needs to go. So that oxygen is going to go where it needs to go from there. So that's kind of the path of the oxygen in gas exchange as we look at that. Now, the oxygen has to attach to, we'll mention here, the diaphragm helps to move that through. We have inhalation and exhalation, and the diaphragm helps to move that through. Let's see. Okay, so in most animals, oxygen is the protein that has an affinity, and it basically hooks to the oxygen and helps it get to where it needs to go. There are some animals that have another molecule that's copper. It contains copper rather than iron. And so these are the two pigments, either a copper-containing pigment used by mollusks and some arthropods, or an iron-containing pigment, hemoglobin. And hemoglobin basically is a molecule where that oxygen can load up in, and then it carries it around. So hemoglobin is very important molecule for this transport of oxygen through the body. All right. And that is where we end our lecture on respiration. Our next lecture goes into circulation, the circulatory system. And as we just showed in here, there is a strong connection. This shows it right here. There's a strong connection with circulation and respiration. So when we get that oxygen in, we have to use the circulatory system to transport that oxygen to where it needs to go. And that's what this diagram shows. But circulation, it helps transport oxygen, but it also helps transport a bunch of other stuff. So the circulatory system is important for a lot of systems in our body. And we'll look at that in the next podcast.